Hi, Cindy.
Hi, Kishore. How are you?
Good. Pleasure to have you here. It feels like I've been interviewing a lot of HubSpot alums,
hmm
and you're like probably the third alumni from HubSpot. I'm sort of interviewing, so good to have you here.
Yeah, thanks for having me. And yeah, we're everywhere. So I saw that you talked with Ryan and Kip, which great conversations and also great people to work with. So
Yes, Cindy. It's funny. Before starting Goldcast, I looked at the BetterUp space so closely, and I was very interested in it. And by the time I got convinced, you guys had already raised like 500 million from Lightspeed and all these different folks. So I decided to sort of not go deep into that, but love the company and love the mission. So really excited to sort of speak to you and sort of get your thoughts.
well, great. Thank you so much again for having me. And it's always humbling to hear that when people are excited about having, and for what it's worth, what we do in trying to help people find clarity, purpose, and passion, and doing that through coaching and transformation, it's a good thing to try to do. So the more people that are out there trying to do it, the better.
Right. Awesome. Siri, my first sort of question, I was preparing for this session, right? And I didn't realize it, but I was looking at the website of BetterUp,
Mhm.
right? And honest to God, I thought it was probably like in the top 1% of the websites I've seen, more from the creative assets that was visible in the website. So if it's okay, I'll actually share the screen
Yeah.
quickly and see if I can show it to the audience folks, right? If you can see my screen, right? So like this asset itself was like so eye grabbing to me, right? And I sort of was spending a lot more time on it, and all these videos that are there in this page, it was
hmm
just like very premium, right? And if you look at all these assets, like it's just so well thought out, and all these creative imagery that is there on the website, I felt like this is like a very high quality website that is done. And I was thinking to my mind, like, how can I actually sort of get this done at Goldcast? But if you can sort of walk me through, like, how did you guys bring this to life? Who was responsible for it, right? How did you assemble the team? Like, just some high level thoughts, and I'll double click on what other questions as well.
Yeah. So, first of all, thank you. Very flattered to hear that you feel this way about our website. We're big fans of it too. I mean, I think, from a brand perspective, it's really interesting. So when I joined BetterUp, I joined about 2.5 years ago, and the company's very rooted in science, technology, and
Hmm.
human connection, right? And so at the time, our website was like extremely clinical. It was
Okay.
almost kind of, again, we sell into large enterprises. Granted, like what we offer, ultimately gets used by individuals, but at the time, and again, we have this like small army of PhDs. We had a ton of stuff that was just like very much written at the 14th grader level, seriously, right? And
Right.
so in terms of like even how it was showing up and what we do as a company, and I think this is one of the most important things and part of what really drove what the visuals look like and what the brand, how the brand is manifesting is really human, right? And there is real emotion to
Right.
it. And there's real, again, like when people are working on themselves and we talk about human transformation so that
Right.
you can become the best version of yourself. And the fact is, when we have a product that like, 80% of people say is life-changing or amazing when they use it, we've kind of earned the right to be like, how do we bring that to the forefront, right? Like bring that human element, make it bold, make it confident. And so I think for us, we got one of the very first things that we did was step back and say, how do we want to show up?
Right.
We know science is important to what we do, but it's not all that we are. And so it really, from a brand perspective, we need to be bringing this to life, like what we're actually making happen, what we're actually helping evoke, right? And so for us, it was getting clear on that, pulling that into like our own brief. And then we did hire an agency, right? So
Agency.
our photography, the majority of our photography, particularly the portraits, are from a shoot that we did with an agency.
Oh, I see. I see.
Yeah. So just to be super transparent with
Right.
everybody, we do have, before we were using stock photography, and we do still have a mix of certain
Okay.
stock imagery, but part of it, even some of our patterns in that we like did photo shoots around or did like video so that we would have like things that were custom to us and unique to us that brought our brand to life. And so who was involved in that? It's interesting because when I started, the team was very, very, very lean. And it was like, hey, we know we want to invest in brand. So, one of the folks I hired was like a head of brand management. It was someone who was coming from, Lululemon and Nike,
Yeah,
right?
I
So
saw
again,
that.
it's like,
Oh,
hey,
wow.
Exactly. We're a performance brand. We care about this stuff.
Mhm.
Bring in people who have done it at the best of the best companies that can help bring it to life. Then we did hire the agency. And then in terms of actually building out our website, we do most of that design. The design of the website as it is now, we do most of that in-house with
In-house.
and internal designers or like a freelancers. We have a couple freelancers that we work with pretty regularly, but we have done the path of like working with different agencies. But for us, it's really how do we, all of our visuals bring to life like what's really core to our
Yeah.
brand.
Yeah, because it's I think like a lot of folks, for example, I know that the quality of shoes, for example, at Nike and Adidas will probably be similar, but I
Yeah.
always pick Nike because it just is like the tagline is so great, the brand is so great, right? It just gets that first impression so vividly. So I particularly thought the website was so well done. And how much time did it take to actually get the whole thing live, like from the previous website, let's say, right? Is it more like a 3-4 month project, or what, or is it like an ongoing project? It never stops. That
Yeah.
yeah, okay.
Yeah, that's why I was kind of like, well, it's still going on and it's been going on for 2 years. So I think for us, you know, and again, it's actually really interesting, like the references around Nike, because for us, like we view ourselves ultimately as a performance brand, right?
Right,
So
right,
when we talk about how can you be at your best and how can you perform at your best, it's because we ultimately, that's what we're driving towards is
right,
like performance for individuals and organizations. And so for us, so it's actually multiple stages because basically when I started website really clinical, pretty much all stock photography, I was like, okay, we've got some real work to do here.
right,
Let's do an interim cleanup because we were getting ready to make some announcements. We were getting ready to do like our big Series D and
right,
bring on some important people. So we did like an interim step cleanup with like stock photography and a
right,
small boutique firm that we worked with to just like get the website and also just change some of the copy to be a little bit more
right,
human and approachable. And so that gave us some time so that we could actually do a little bit of a longer term,
right,
like overhaul on the visual language,
right,
right? So for us,
right.
we started just real rough timeline. December, I talked to agencies. January, February, we sussed it out, kicked off the project in
Mm,
February. And then we're working through the overall, like, okay, how do we want the brand to show up?
right.
What does this look like? In the summer, we did the shoot. And while we were doing all of that work, we're also doing new wireframes and that for the website. So
I
we were
see.
able to then pull things in. But yeah,
Got
but
it.
then once you get there, it's something where you constantly continue working on it,
Got it.
right?
Got it.
It's
Yeah. And which agency did you guys use, if I may ask? Any
Yeah,
name?
we actually worked with Mythology.
Okay.
So they had worked, and again, for us, we ultimately, it's about like also we're selling into companies, but it's also we have this member base, right? So it's
Right,
B2B and we're B2B2C, and we also have an
right,
emerging
right.
direct to consumer. So Mythology actually had worked with mostly consumer brands. So they'd
I
worked early days like Warby Parker, had just basically like that was their book and they had
cool.
some tech. And so for us, it's like that was more what we wanted to be in
That's
line with.
awesome.
Yeah.
And actually, the other thing is, I saw these case studies as well, right? Where you actually go and like interview customers in a live uh,
Yeah.
office of sorts. I have always been very curious to see that. Is that an internal team's work, or is there also more like, hey, we have an external team that can go in and shoot these videos at the clients and customers' office, and like what is the process that gets involved in that?
Yeah, well, first of all, you have to have the customers, so that's
Yeah.
helpful. So you have to make sure you're doing that work.
Yeah.
No, but we do have it's a mix of internal with some external extra support, right? So basically, and again, we don't have like one agency that we work with on
Right.
all of these videos, and frankly, several of those videos have been created over time. So it's also like when you have a strong brand and you're able to get something, certain standards in place, you're able to execute on it. And so we actually have an internal executive producer who really like manages like when we are pulling together videos and knows like the quality bar that we're at and the type of storytelling we do, and then knows how to vet. Again, we aren't going and hiring like the massive agencies for
Right.
those types of things because we don't
Right.
have those budgets. But I think that, it's more of like, okay, we have sort of a pool that we can work with that we knows how to work in our styles.
Yeah.
And so the executive producer manages it from that production perspective. But then the other piece of it, right, is just having the story and making
Right.
sure you know what the story is before you ever go and shoot those videos, right? So it's like we know what we want to say. We've worked with the customer going into it. And part of what makes them so rich is that like you have that entire, you've worked through that outline, you've worked through that interview with them. And obviously it's like a multi-hour shoot to get down to a couple minutes of really great gold. Yeah.
Yeah. If your exec producer is freelancing, I would love to sort of chat with them and pick his thoughts. But he has done a good job. So kudos to him or her for doing that.
Well, he's not a freelancer. He is full time. But
that's what, if he's freelancing, I would love to.
No, but we have a number of other freelancers, and again, sometimes it's smaller, like smaller agencies that we work with too.
Right. Yeah. One question from Tiana, Cindy, I'll pick this for you. Big fan of the brand. What were the biggest challenges in defining and executing on the BetterUp brand? And I have some questions also on this, but I'll let you sort of answer this question first.
Yeah, I mean, I think some of the biggest challenges are, when you start to dig into what all we're doing, right? So like for just to step back. So for those of you who aren't familiar with BetterUp, so we actually are like, we own the patent on digital coaching, so that we really started off in the space and created a category around digital coaching. And as we did that, we also really take this approach that says, hey, it's not just about going in and, working on your professional life, but it's also your personal. So we have sleep coaching, nutrition coaching, like this whole host of things, right? So, and what we've been building to, and actually where the space that we're moving into is this next category around human transformation, where it's a platform and everything plugs into it. Now, the reason I'm teeing that up around what that means for the brand is there's just a lot to it, right? And so again, it's like when we're looking at, okay, how do we actually want to talk about the brand? And especially, in a B2B tech space where you're having enterprise sales conversations. So oftentimes it's, okay, well, is it just the product defining the brand, right? Or is it just, hey, is it just our science or our technology defining the brand? So for us, I think there's that constant push and pull of like, first also stepping back and saying, what do we mean by brand? Because for us, and for me, it's brand isn't just your logo. It's not just the visuals. It's actually like the lifeblood. It's the thing that gives you the guardrails for what you're doing from the expression and how you show up, but also like, even as you think about the product, how you go to market, right? Like it should all be reinforcing the brand. And so from a challenge perspective, when you have something that is so rich, but it's also so new and is a new category, it's really like, okay, well, what is that space that you want to play in? Because you've already kind of created a new space. And so I think for us, like part of that process was just really, and for me was like really like working with like, the co-founders and a few of the other folks on the executive team, and like having those conversations, especially for people, we're almost 10 years old, who's been here for a while. What has this company always meant? And what's just core to our DNA? And how do we make sure that we're always pulling that through? And again, like a company that continuously innovates, there's new stuff that always pops up. So you want to throw a bunch in, but it's like, but what's the stuff that's always core to us that drives that innovation too?
Right. So it's funny. To be honest, I underestimated a lot about the importance of a company's narrative because having a strong narrative really aligns the product team on what they have to build for the next 3 years. It aligns the go-to-market team on what we are going on the next 3 years. We are, we're obviously, younger than you guys, but we are doing this exercise right now. And it's not an easy exercise because it needs a lot of thinking on how the market is, like where do you want to play in the next 3 years. When you did this exercise for BetterUp, like, did you guys think about, hey, here is where we want to play in the next 5 years, whereas the current narrative doesn't hold true for it? Let's get into there. And who all did you align to get this narrative right? Like it's a large exercise. It's not an easy thing to sort of do. So just curious to understand the process that you went through for the story of BetterUp.
Yeah, and it's also it's a lot. It's an interesting exercise again because we have multiple like customers, right? So we have when we think about like the universe that we're talking to, and talking with, we have our B2B customers, which really is more CHROs, VPs of talent, VPs of HR, right? Other CXOs actually that we work with. Then we have like the members,
right?
We have members, right, who are actually like. They can be frontline managers. And there's a lot of work that we're doing on that front too, just, every employee, right? And we have, to your point, coaches is a whole other area. And coaches is something, we're at a point where we have over 3,000 coaches. And so there's also like work that has to be done to
make sure that they
recruit. Yeah. And so to your point, it's like, it is it isn't just like a really super quick exercise. And so for us, it was saying like, okay, how do we make sure that we're being really clear on these different groups that are part of our world, right? And like when they're part of our world, like what is it that we actually mean to them? And I think, fundamentally, like for us, it's, a brand, if a brand is really, really true to its core, it's not going to change like drastically over 10 years, even if you bring out new products, right? So if you think about our mission is, helping people live with greater clarity, purpose, and passion. Nowhere in that mission does it say coaching. Nowhere in the mission does it even say like, our mental fitness products. But what we're building is because it aligns to this mission and this bigger idea of like, how do we help people reach their potential? How do we help, we talk very internally, but like anything internal is external these days, so it's like vision around like, how do you have self-actualization for all? Like that's a huge lofty thing. And so the products are just going to continue reinforcing that we're doing that work. But I think for us, it's like, again, maybe your actual like positioning at a point in time, maybe your actual strategy at a point in time will evolve year by year or even like, over a 3-year window, but the actual like core of the brand will generally stay true.
Right. There is one more question, Cindy, that sort of came from Tiana again. What is the impetus that led to the redefining the brand from a clinical to a performance-driven brand?
Yeah, well, I think it was, I think that's a great question. And the fact is we've actually always been a performance brand. So even in the very, very founding, like in the earliest days, like our CEO, Alexia, will talk about the fact that we always saw the idea of like performance and well-being being in these interconnected pursuits, right? The clinical side of it was just, really, it was manifesting because we had so much science.
Right.
And quite frankly, that is so differentiating, right? Like we have, again, from the earliest days, we have had this incredible science board where we work with like, the founder of like positive psychology, and we work with people like Adam Grant and luminaries. And then again, we have like all of these scientists internally that are constantly just trying to understand what's the latest and greatest, and also creating the latest and greatest research around behavioral science to figure out how do we actually use that to make the product better. Right. So what I would say is, again, when I was brought in, part of it was just the company going through this moment of like, okay, getting to this, we've built all this amazing stuff. Like now, how do we actually get it in front of people? Right. How do we get people to know about it? And I think it was really, the decision on going from clinical wasn't saying like, hey, we don't have the science or that. That's still like core to what we do. And that's a big part of everything that we do. But it's now, how does it show up in a way that's more approachable and it's actually, quite frankly, more valuable and useful to a larger group of people?
Right. So on the go-to-market side, is the product typically bought by the CHROs in a company? Is that typically how the sales motion works? That a CHRO has to onboard BetterUp for the entire company? Is that typically how it is?
I mean, there's different models
Okay.
for us. So in certain organizations, we might be brought in through, talent or learning and development. And in others, we are brought in through the CHRO. In others, it's really interesting. Like we do sales coaching. And so in certain organizations, like, the CRO or like the president of sales will actually bring us in too. So I think for us, like we have different entry points and it's just different scale depending on where we're at.
Got it. That makes sense. So, it's one thing that I sort of recently saw, I think from Sydney Sloan, if I'm correct, on LinkedIn, was that she was talking about how if you don't invest in brand early on, you'll have to buy that demand at a much expensive price later, right? Because if all your campaigns are all about sign up for this event, sign up for this form, right? Like you will just be like a very tactical company and you will never be able to educate your market about what you do. Would love to sort of hear about some brand campaigns you've sort of led at BetterUp and what that resulted in from a pipeline standpoint.
No, and it's so interesting. My CEO and I were talking about this just a couple of weeks ago, where we're like, brand is really just like the long game version of demand, right? Ultimately. And so I think, so for us, like we've actually done, any time that we're doing a brand campaign, we work really closely with our growth team and our revenue marketing to make sure that we have that connection. And also, quite frankly, like we'll work with them on like, what are the KPIs for different campaigns that tie to it. So, a couple examples. One was last year, we actually did our first ever public Inner Workday. So as a company, we do 4 Inner Workdays a year. And with Inner Workdays, it's really, again, from a science perspective, we've done all the science behind like having that time carved out to reset, realign, refocus, like can actually, the improvements and what it does in someone's performance and how they show up is incredible. And so we were like, okay, well, let's actually produce an inner Workday publicly where we can invite our customers. Some of our customers actually invited like their whole companies, and then also just like promoted it to people like generally, right? And like to our member base, and then also just broadly. And so for us, we were like, okay, from a brand perspective, we knew our certain brand metrics, but then we also worked with the growth team on, okay, well, what were key, for us, like what were some key metrics to look at, and like, could we actually drive leads and pipeline with this, right? And so, when we looked at Inner Workday, it was 5 hours of amazing programming, and it was a mix, right? Because we brought on CHROs from companies. We also brought on researchers. We brought on coaches to actually like talk about coaching sessions and like how to do inner work through that. We did meditation, we had yoga, we had, and then we had like celebrity, right? And so what we saw was, from a brand perspective, I think between pre and post coverage, we had like over 760 pieces of coverage in media, right? So from a brand point of view, we're like, all right. And we had 150,000 like views to the page that day. And we had 22,000 people, over 22,000 people showed up or signed up. And so when we had 22,000 people sign up, when you look at like the segments within that, we did have some potential consumers. We had some of our current customers, and it was a way that we continue to engage them. And we could say like, how does this actually tie to further engagement? And then we also did bring in new companies and contacts who hadn't engaged with us before as a way, right, to really involved. And I think for us, part of it too, like when we talk about our brand internally as a team, we're like, how do we create something that people know, love, and want to be a part of? And I think like at HubSpot, one of the things that I saw from a B2B marketing perspective was like, you can really create a movement that is core to what your brand is, and like get people involved in this movement, and over time it can actually lead to demand. So Inner Workday for us, we were looking at like, how do we actually like start to fuel the fire around the movement of like saying like, hey, it's okay to like have your team, and also as an individual to carve out that time for yourself to do that work on yourself.
So Inner Workday, if I understand this, it's basically a time that you take out through the entire day to sort of work on whatever is important to you as a person, right? Be it personal, professional. Interesting. That brings me to an interesting question, Cindy. Since you guys have all these research that talks about how to improve the performance of an employee, apart from coaching, what all like have you found that is important to improve an employee performance, right, at a company? Is like for example, like these rituals like this, for example, right, like taking time out for yourself, like are there things like that you would advise companies and employees to think about for their performance?
Yeah, I mean, I think like, look, like part of it is taking that time out. Part of it's, I mean, when we have like on inner work, it's like gratitude practices is actually like a part of inner work. Like, doing even things like going for like nature walks in that, right? Where it's like really carving out that time to like think and basically in reflections just generally are part of doing inner work. And so, it's interesting though, because when we look at what really drives performance, right, it's like, how do you it comes back to also like, are you building up resilience, right? And what's going on with your, do you have the right mindsets, and do you have like the actual growth mindset, or the ability to like unlearn potentially so you can learn something new? And I think that that's a lot of the work that we do too.
Got it. To be honest, I've been looking at getting a coach for myself in the last couple of years, because a lot of folks have told how critical it is for them to open up to someone and get the right feedback from a coach. I didn't pursue because it got a little too expensive, and in general, I think the good coaches are expensive, right? And it became tough for me to afford that. But talk to me, Cindy, about from your experience, what does a coach do to a person in terms of how they can operate at a high level, right? Like what makes that coach unique, and how do you find the right coach? Because I also learned that you have to talk to a lot of coaches to identify the right one that fits your sort of unique mode of operating. So would just like love to hear your thoughts on that one.
It's actually interesting that you're saying this. So we do whenever a company sign up for BetterUp, there's this onboarding process. And so for all of the members, people who get access to BetterUp, we do whole person assessments. And so basically, and this is based on like our researchers and our science team pulls together, like we have all of these assessments that we do. And so you basically go through and answer a bunch of questions about yourself, and it teases out like, okay, hey, like, what are your strengths? What are your areas to work on, all of that?
Right.
Based on that information and some other information that you give us, we, and this is because we've been doing this for 10 years, we're sitting on tons of data and have the AI behind it to actually then say, hey, of our 3,000 plus coaches, here's, a set of like 6 coaches, right? That you can select from. And so I think to your point, we know that was one of the things that we were setting out to solve for in the beginning was like to try to go out and find one and mix and match. And we actually have like, our match rate is over 97% of people being like, of who they select, it actually works because we know those identifying factors. And again, some of it's related to like, and then there's also the description of the coach. But as far as then what the coaches actually work with people on, right, and where we see it being really effective, ultimately it's like holding a mirror up to yourself, right? So like what really amazing coaches do really well is bring like this deep curiosity, and like we'll just continue asking you and asking you to ask yourself. They're also really amazing at accountability and like understanding like how to help drive accountability. And for different people, it's different things. But ultimately, the reason you're working with a coach is because you want to get somewhere. You want to achieve something. You want to move forward. And so they're really there as that kind of partner for you in that journey. And then, I mean, I think the other thing is what we found at least are the coaches, some of the coaches who are the, strongest performers, they personally are also, they care deeply about impact, right? So again, it's coaches aren't, and generally like people aren't signing up to be a coach because they're, like, oh, I'm going to get a paycheck by whatever, like not really listening. Like, they generally care about that impact, but then they also do work on themselves, right? So like, it's amazing. Like we have these incredible coaches who are just like, okay, hey, I want to just keep getting better and better at my craft myself, right? And they look at themselves as true craftspeople too.
That's awesome.
And I think that's part of what makes coaches incredible. And so a lot of the work that we're actually working on now as a brand team in partnership with the coach team is how do we actually work together to figure out like how can we give our coaches even more resources, right? And we get them, give them the tools so that they can work on their own transformation as well.
That's fantastic. Yeah. But no offense. I've seen people who wake up one day and say they want to become a coach, and they become a coach on LinkedIn. So there are definitely some folks out there. But to your point, I think that's fantastic. Like I said, they're more kind of folks who are trying to improve themselves, but also improve the other person. So that's a well-defined answer. I want to take some few questions in the from the audience, folks. So one is question from Chaitra MD. Hi, Cindy. What's your strategy for events this year? What kinds of digital programs are you guys hosting?
Yeah. So, I mean, I think for events this year, and it's actually, and I can speak to an event that we did this year. We are looking at like, how can we have just, we were doing actually a lot of virtual events before. And so it's like, okay, how do we actually like think about what are the key, digital events that we're doing that are, and how will they have the most impact? So I think for us, it's looking at taking, the research that our teams do. So for example, Kishore, as you were mentioning, like we have all the PhDs and we work together on research from a marketing perspective. We actually are looking at events as a way to like help like bring more awareness of these insights and get more of that out there on the virtual side. But then also for in-person events, we're actually like working through a span of different types of events. Most of them are actually focused on engaging executives, like on the C-suite. But we also earlier this year produced an event called Uplift, where really it was about bringing the larger community together. It was mostly executives as well, and it was a 2-day event. But for us, it was like, how do we not just have a standard conference, but again, as a brand, like it's important to create like a real experience that people just like have an emotional connection with, an attachment to. So for us, that was actually like our main event for the year. And then we've actually, we were able to use most of that content and there was a virtual program along with it, but now we have that content available like for the year too. Yeah.
And usually it's very tough to get execs to events, right? So as you would know, right? You might get to a lot of events. How do you guys get the CHROs to come to your dinners and series? Like, what topics interest them? Like, how do you sort of get more folks attending your events for the
Yeah.
dinner series? Yeah.
I mean, I think part of it is, as I mentioned, we work with like our science board, and it's just this
Right.
incredible group of luminaries, like who are doing amazing things. So it's like, one option is bringing one of these folks on our board that can talk to them, about like some of the latest research they're doing. The
Right.
other is like bringing our own research and insights that
Right.
we've got going on. Right. So again, it was really interesting. Over the past year, like we've put out research around like inclusive leadership and, also like future-minded leadership. So how do you look forward? But then also we had this one report called the connection crisis. And I don't know if you saw, the US Surgeon General actually today was out saying like, hey, loneliness is is the big issue.
I saw that in Twitter.
Yeah. And so it's interesting because last summer we had actually been hearing percolating from different customers that like, it seemed that there was a real lack of connection, which makes sense because of the,
Remote work. Yeah. Remote work is a big
and,
yeah.
and that. And so we actually were like, okay, can we dig into this and understand it more? Right. And like really understand it, and also understand other things that we can do to fix it. And does it really matter? Right. Like we believe it matters. We believe belonging and connection do. And so we were able to dig into that. And it's just interesting because when we have that type of research, then we're able to also bring CHRs together to say like, hey, let's talk about this.
Yes.
Let's uncover it. Here's what we're learning. Like
Yes.
truly, you have 22% of people said they didn't have one friend at work. But if they did have one friend at work, they were sometimes more likely to say like crazy in terms of like what the actual impact is. So we were also then able to have real conversations with them about like, here's what you can do about it. Right. Like, and it's not always just like, oh, buy BetterUp coaching. Right? But it's like, hey, actually, here are different things and like what it can mean for you and the impact that it's having on your business.
That's a great answer, because since we see a lot of events that our customers do, and that's the only kinds of events that typically work, where the peers come to learn about a particular topic that they don't have access to, or they get to meet other folks and talk about some challenges. They don't want to hear a vendor presentation during the dinner series. So I sort of completely agree with that.
Well, it's like, and ultimately, how are you creating value for someone? Right? Like, it's like, how do you just create value? And that value can be education, it can be access, it can be, engagement with other people. And I think even for our big event Uplift, like it was really important to us to say like, okay, we don't want this to just turn into like sales pitches. Right. And so like, really we're going to make a serious investment in this so that we can bring different CHRO perspectives to the stage, bring completely outside. We had like David Chang and his coach, Marshall Goldsmith, who's like one of the preeminent coaches of all time, like the coach to coaches, right? Like basically talk about like, hey, you have one of the highest performing people in their field. What does this actually look like? Right. Like, and again, from our perspective, it's like some of these, it wasn't just our customers. It was almost, it was actually more so not customers than were, but it's like, just to like get that education and that understanding of like, this is why make the investment with us, make it with somebody, but just make the investment in your people to do this work.
Right. So there is one question on a related topic. How do you get the most out of content after the event, right? Because a lot of times these recordings sit on the shelves of the website and don't get repurposed quite effectively. What is your sort of advice on that?
Oh my gosh. Yeah, I love this because I love getting as much leverage out of something as you possibly can. Because when you make the investment, right, and especially like coming from, like I was at HubSpot for about 6 years when we went from like a few hundred to a few thousand people. Budgets changed very much so over time. Same thing with BetterUp. Like we're in this interesting growth phase. So, it's not like we have tons and tons of money to throw around. And so it's like when you create, amazingly compelling content, I think the big thing is, especially if you have these longer form videos or talks, whatever, it's like, okay, what all can be, how can you create written content out of that? Whether it's blog posts, whether it's like LinkedIn and other, whether it's placed articles like externally, right? Like how can you then also like chop it up and use it for like, there's always going to be a couple great sound bites that you can actually use on social and give also to your sales team and give to just like your larger employee base. Like for us, like we've actually done a lot of work from a brand. An important part of us is, again, our brand has such a human element, like our people are a big part of our brand, right? And giving them the ability to then share that content. But again, I think and I would say a quick piece of advice is like, as that content is getting recorded, having someone who is just like, sorry, I think my Wi-Fi just got a little funky, but having someone who like literally is just like taking notes throughout, that's like this will be the soundbite, this will be
Oh,
a soundbite,
yes.
this will be a snippet. Like, because again, when you have that hour-long thing, sometimes it's intimidating to dig into. But if you've had someone do that
Right.
along the way, almost timestamp it like a
Yes.
video editor, like
Right.
good.
Or hopefully AI can help
Yeah,
identify
exactly.
these
Or
nuggets.
hopefully, yeah, exactly.
Okay, okay, fantastic. There's one question from Jordan Ben Sini. What's one of the objectives you're working towards this coming quarter?
Yeah, I mean, I think for us, like this quarter, really, we actually have another we have another research report coming out, so to understand, that work. But I mean, I think for us, part of it is just like continuing to make sure that we're delivering value and
Right.
engaging senior level executives, right, at
Mm.
companies. And I think part of it for us is also like, how are we starting to build community among them? So again, we've hosted Uplift, we're hosting these other events. They want to talk to each other so badly. So to your
Right.
point, it's like for us, like one of the things that we're focused on, at a high level strategy is like, how are we helping become a trusted advisor to them? How are we, bringing them insights? How are we building that community among them? And then from just a straight up brand perspective, it's continuing to build on like, how do we help, help bring performance into the conversation?
Right. Right. On this point, Sunny, there is one from Nina Kensis as well. I'm a market researcher, as you know. You touched on research and how it affects and influences your branding. What kind of research do you do in-house to improve your products and services? Because it's so easy to
Yeah.
do a research on a topic that is just so oversaid and there's no new insight for people, right?
Yeah.
So how do you identify the right topic, and also what kinds of topics do you sort of plan? Is what Dina is asking.
Yeah, no. So thanks, Nina, for that. Yeah, we actually have a couple of different pockets of research, right? So we have like the labs team, which is the PhD team thinking about the behavioral science, and they're digging through, they're working with academic institutions on research. And then they're also digging through like our member data to really understand, like, we'll see, hey, what are the burgeoning topics? What are things that people, what's actually popping up that it seems from a trend perspective, oh, resilience is actually going down.
Right.
Let's think about that, right? So, and when we see like, hey, something like resilience is trending down like it was going into COVID, it's like, okay, well, how do we actually help bolster that, right? So from a products and services perspective, then it's like, okay, well, we should start really, maybe these are new indices that we should
Right.
measure in our product. Maybe these are, different pieces. The other type of research we'll do is actually connect, like, again, when we talk about personal and professional, we're able to say like, okay, if this is what's happening from a well-being index perspective or resilience index perspective, et cetera. And now we're actually able to tie that to what does that mean, for instance, in a team like sales, to quota attainment, right? And to sales opportunities and to pipeline. And so we actually will do that type of analysis as well. And for us, it really informs like how we think about like, okay, as we're building out our products, like having that understanding of one, what matters to our customers, but then two, also just sort of being able to see trends over time and where we think that we could actually have significant impact.
Got it. So on the point about resilience, right? I'm reading this book. I don't read a lot of books, but I'm reading this book called Amp It Up by Frank Slootman, right?
Yes.
Right, where he talks about an organization that is resilient is actually a competitive advantage, and that is something that you can't copy, and it's deeply brought in from the culture, etc., etc. Right? What, since you said like the resilient, you've seen typically sort of has gone down a little bit since sort of COVID. What factors led to that for employees to have less resilience over the last few years? Is it the connection is missing? Like any data that supports that, or what's?
Oh, yeah. So the resilience side of it was actually more in early COVID. And then what we saw was when people were actually doing like working on themselves and again, we would look at, okay, here's certain pockets that aren't using BetterUp and R. And basically it came down to coaching, right? Like, are people actually like able to come back from setbacks, and are people able to bounce back? Part of it also comes from like, we talk a lot about like mental fitness and just like, honestly, like overall well-being and how it's related, right? So truly, this may sound weird, but things like, hey, how's someone doing with like their sleep and their nutrition actually have significant impact on, overall well-being, that have impact on overall performance. So it's all very much interconnected. And so I think when we think about it, it really, it's more of looking at like, okay, there are multiple factors that go into it.
Right. One last question from my end, Cindy. Now, you've sort of moved from HubSpot and other companies to a
Yeah.
company that truly cares about like human performance, right? Are there any workplace rituals that you guys follow at BetterUp that you would advise other companies to follow? Obviously, apart from coaching, but anything else that
Yeah.
you sort of instituted in your teams or across the company that has really helped
Yeah.
improve the performance of the
Well, I
company?
mean, I do think, we've always had 4 in our work days a year. So we've always made it a point to really carve that out. And part of it's also just saying like, hey, this is important. So
Right.
even if it's beyond the inner work day. The other thing we'll do things like, at the beginning of our all hands. So our company-wide all hands, even as we've grown, it's like, we'll have like these mindful moments almost, right? Like at the beginning where sometimes it'll be a meditation, sometimes it'll be just some kind of like physical exercise, like whatever. It'll just be a couple of minutes to get everyone sort of like on the same,
Right.
on that same page and on that same set. And then truly like everyone at BetterUp has access to a coach and is very much encouraged to work with the coach, and also has access to like all of the coaches. So if it's parenting coaching, if it's again, like these different modalities of it. And so for us, it's really making sure that like people have the stuff that, and again, we have the data that proves out like it drives performance, that we're actually bringing that so that we can, for us, we know things that really matter in terms of people's performance are their mindsets mattering. Like, do they feel that what the work that they're doing is meaningful and it has purpose? And then also their managers, quite frankly,
Right.
right? And like those frontline managers and investing there.
That's awesome, Cindy. Cindy, I think we're coming to the end. I just want to thank you for doing this because, personally, I've always been impressed with the brand, like I said, and also how you guys created a category, because digital coaching was not new before, and it's tough to take budget for any new category or any new product, and you guys have completely paved the path for many other companies to follow. So thanks for doing this. Really appreciate it. One last question. Any other CMO that you would sort of wish that we should interview on the podcast, since we have interviewed probably every CMO from HubSpot?
Well, I'll give you 2 more, actually. So, Kieran Flanagan, who's the CMO of Zapier, right?
Yeah.
So Kieran's obviously, most people know him in the space, but he's, obviously a good one. And then Megan Keeney Anderson, who she actually had been product marketing, ran the content engine of HubSpot, and is now the CMO running marketing at Jasper. So generative AI. So, if you want to have a very interesting conversation.
There are a lot of HubSpot folks who become CMOs. Wow.
Yeah, we
That's
work
awesome.
on it now.
But thanks again for doing this. Really appreciate your time today. Thank you for that.
Yeah, thank you so much, and thanks everyone for joining us.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you so much. Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.